an expansion of the Caribbean Basin Initiative through SOCA. And we'll explain about that coming up next on Carib Nation. Hello, welcome to Carib Nation. My name is Doris Dean. Today we're talking about a topic that we have not addressed for quite a while, the Caribbean Basin Initiatives. Do you remember that? Well, there's now going to be an expansion, or at least there is a move with the hope that it will be expanded. The original CBI dealt with products in the Caribbean, trading with the United States. This time we're going to add services. Services of the Caribbean, SOCA. And that is what we're going to talk about today. And with me to explain SOCA, where it came from, where the idea came from, and what we can expect from it, are Andrea Hewitt, an attorney in the Washington area, a trade attorney originally from Jamaica, and David Lewis, Vice President of Manchester Trade, which is an advocacy outlet here in, an outfit here in Washington. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, thank you.
Andrea, let's start to talk a little bit about the CBI first. Let's set the standard here and tell us what has the CBI meant to the Caribbean? What was it intended to do, and how far along have we come with that?
CBI, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, deals with trade in goods. What it does is it offers products from the Caribbean with duty-free access to the U.S. market. In that context, it's what is considered a trade preference program, because by with Caribbean products are able to enter the U.S. market duty-free, and in that way get some kind of a cost advantage or cost competitive advantage with respect to other goods. In the broader context as well, CBI, when it was first initiated, included support for trade investment and trade promotion, support for financing, etc., out of the Caribbean. And over time, because CBI was first initiated in 1983, a number of that has dissipated. And this is why the SOCA initiative is so interesting as well, because it provides an opportunity to address some of that. In terms of the CBI, it's important to understand a couple of other things as well. The legislation was rolled out in 2 phases, really. So there is one aspect of CBI, CEBRA, which is permanent. And it is actually the only, I think.
CBERA, so
I'm sorry, Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act. Okay. And as the name would suggest, that was prompted by a U.S. response to provide economic recovery, support economic recovery in the region after the hurricanes, a whole series of hurricanes. And that it was passed initially not just for the Caribbean, but for a number of Central American countries as well. So it has 2 components. There is where a number of goods, most goods, all right, receive duty-free access. And that aspect of CBI is permanent. It's never going to expire. A second component expanded on that program to a select number of products that are typically excluded by the U.S. from programs like these. So leather, watches, luggage, trying to remember, textiles, thank you, textiles. So not so important to the region anymore, except for Haiti.
Right.
But that expires in 2020. The other important thing to keep in mind for CBI is that trade preference programs like these, where the U.S. gives access for products from a particular region without in turn providing that access either to those to other countries, is a derogation of its obligations, its most favored nation obligations under the WTO. And so to continue that program, the U.S. requires a waiver from the WTO. And that waiver is currently in place, but it expires September of next year. So that's a little bit of the backdrop in terms of CBI. Oh, I'm sorry, another important aspect is the change in the trading relations with the U.S. of a number of the original CBI beneficiaries, most notably Dominican Republic and pretty much all of the Central American countries, including Panama, who have gone on to negotiate and sign free trade agreements.
Yeah.
Exactly, well, reciprocal free trade agreements with the United States. For any number of reasons, which we can explore or not in this show, the Caribbean region is not ready to sign a free trade agreement with the U.S. But it does mean that CBI now focuses exclusively on the Caribbean countries, English-speaking, Haiti, and some of the Dutch, Suriname, and some of the Dutch others as well.
David, we haven't talked about the CBI for quite some time. CARICOM as a body has had this agreement with the United States. Do you think then that the services that that SOCA is looking to address, that the Caribbean has been sort of morphed into over time, do you think that this is more beneficial, the way to go, to add this on? And how do you see the Caribbean changing to work in this new framework?
Well, I think the first thing is that this whole initiative is just a sort of de facto realization of what has happened with the regional economies. And we're now 30 years of the original CBI, and it succeeded. It worked. The United States developed a competitive alliance in various industrial sectors: apparel, textile, leather, footwear, some electronics, some pharmaceuticals, with about 24 countries in this region, whereby they provided competitive labor and supply chain advantages that in the United States were becoming too costly. And that succeeded. You had the entire survival and transformation of the U.S. apparel industry was because of free trade zones in Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Haiti, all of Central America. And then you can add Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and that's what's made that industry survive. And that's what developed well-paying manufacturing for export jobs in those markets. Now, the logical success of that preferential, unilateral, non-reciprocal program was eventually free trade reciprocity and competitiveness in that area, because you have supply chain advantages in labor, production costs, and size. Well, and transportation linkages, and basically the entire, to make this continue. Well, the reality has been that for most CARICOM markets, the largest being Jamaica until Haiti joined, that became impossible. Low supply of high-cost labor, small physical areas, and then what we've come to realize now in 30 years, the economies developed advantages in non-goods areas, services. What are services? Tourism is a service. Telecommunications is a service. Education is a service. Entertainment is a service. Music, All these areas which when you go to the Caribbean now, you see this is what's booming. Financial services,
Yeah.
insurance and so on, because you couldn't compete in goods manufacturing anymore. Shortly,
So they had to.
they
were forced into-
graduated.
yeah.
These are better paying jobs. This isn't cheap labor. This is not mass production in some factory zone. We still have a bit of that in the region, but
It's not
the,
to
the,
extent
the,
that-
the economic structure of the islands in CARICOM was such that it was transformed, and the transformation was not into deepening and expanding the manufacturing for export base like it has been for the Dominican Republic or Haiti or Colombia or El Salvador. It went into services, which is a value-added, knowledge-based, education-centered industry, which are all the areas that everybody keeps
Caribbean.
telling us the Caribbean
Yes,
is
it
strong on.
excels in, yes,
Okay?
yeah.
So when we come to look at it, we have a situation where the program succeeded, the region graduated, but the United States trade relationship and investment relationship with these groups of countries is based on a 20th century goods-centered regime when we're in a 21st century service-centered
regime.
economy. So we're at a mismatch. So the idea was, well, what can we do to build into that relation the factual reality that services is the dominant economic activity, and how can that be incentivized to spur the same logic of CBI, economic growth in the region, because we all understand for the past 15 years it's been economic stagnation in most
Right.
of the countries.
Yeah. Well, I love to have you explain things because you always break them down so well for us. So who were the original stakeholders, so to speak, or the,
Well,
the
let me tell you.
architects of SOCA?
We started Manchester Trade, our firm. We're a business advisory firm. We've worked with many of the governments and businesses in the region here in the US. We started almost exactly 8 years ago. People will remember when the Democrats retook the House and Charlie Rangel, that great friend of the Caribbean, was chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means. And one of the things he was doing was handling trade relations, CBI, the free trade agreements, and he kept saying, what can we do for CARICOM? And we started discussing this idea of services and going back and forth with people in the region here. We've since had the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and people kept saying, yes, this makes sense, but what would we do? How would it be? And by the way, we've got a little small issue. We love you, David. We love Manchester Trade, but you are not the region. We need what we call in trade parlance a demandeur from the region. Who from the region is asking this?
Yeah.
And we started then engaging the region. Personally, I had about over 8 years, 12 meetings with various prime ministers who've come and gone, ministers of trade, and we just couldn't get traction. So we started trying to sell it to the private sector, and we still couldn't get traction. And one day our good friend Andrea said, you know, I work with a NGO group, regional, CPDC, the Caribbean Policy Development Center. I know them very well from my early days when I used to wear an NGO hat back in the 80s. And I think they'll be interested in this because they're very active in trade issues in the region. Sure, bring them up to Washington. This is 2010. They came up, we set up meetings for them, started sort of, you know, ruffling feathers in Washington and exciting people with ideas, do a couple of events, do press releases, and this sort of was taken off. Unfortunately, CPDC couldn't sort of take the mantle, so we had a bit of a down period, and then the private sector sort of came back. And particularly the American Chamber of Commerce in Jamaica, which is a co-chair of SOCA, and the Coalition of Service Industries in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the other co-chair. And to make a long story short, they said, can you come down? Can we do some seminars? What should we do? And they said, you know what? Instead of Manchester Trade doing something and going through all these challenges that, you know, you're an American firm, you're not in the region, and, you know, the US needs a demander, you say, how about if we do this? And then you just become our advisors. Well, of
Excellent.
course, that's a win-win because
Yeah.
we don't need to be owners of another venture and so
Yeah.
on. And they said, let's do this. This was 9 months ago, last June 2013 in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
And let's start moving this with the members. We need to get resources,
right.
money.
As always.
And then you in Washington organize everything for us. And that's when we had the meeting in November at the OAS during the conference on the Caribbean Basin with Caribbean Central American Action. And we did the launch. I must give the credit to TTCSI in Trinidad. They came up with the acronym SOCA.
Yes.
So the Trinis would come up
Trinis,
with
of
something
course.
like that. Services of the Caribbean.
Right.
And what we've started then is a three-prong strategy in the region and in the U.S. First, messaging and putting think caps on to say, what can we do? Secondly, membership recruitment. And thirdly, engagement with stakeholders in the region, governments, the regional organizations, business groups, and here to get the message out. So we're walking, talking, and eating at the same time. It can be done. It can be done. And right now, we're at a 3-level stage of analysis and action. Level 1 is, do you need to do something with the CBI legislation that would say, as we did with CBI originally, here is an incentive for U.S. CARICOM services, trade, and investment. And the challenge there is that with goods, as Andrea mentioned, what you do is you say, we reduce duties, we reduce tariffs, we reduce taxes, we take away quotas, and you can ship everything in. Well, in services, we don't have any of those things.
Right, exactly. You have to deal with professionals.
So what do you need? Well, there's a big challenge area in services, which is movement of professionals, which of course is visas, immigration, and so on.
Yeah.
Where in the U.S., we all know that is a red
issue.
flag, but we're in the middle of immigration reform, so that could be something. So we're not clear that we need or want some legislative change to CBI, but it's something we're all looking at.
I see.
Second level is, well, maybe you just need something what we call executive action. Within the framework you have, just do something that doesn't require a law. It doesn't require a change in the trade regime. It's just an executive action. And we have an example of something that has worked already between the U.S. and another developing country, which is the U.S. arrangements which are called TIFAs, Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, where without being a trade negotiation, two governments or groups of governments engage in trade and investment facilitation. CARICOM and the U.S. have a TIFA that was concluded last May 2013, and the first meeting was the week before we launched SOCA, November 15, 2013. Services is one of the issues on that long list.
So you got that on that.
So that could be something to work on because Uruguay and the United States in 2008 launched a TIFA because Uruguay could not have a free trade agreement. And they focused on logistics services, software development, and ICT services, information and communications technology.
Sorry, if I can interject
Yes,
here. One of the things to watch out for, of course, with the TIFAs, though, is that they can remain a talk shop. So we've had, this is the second TIFA that's been signed between CARICOM and the U.S., and the first one, I don't think
1991,
they even talked. Yeah.
right.
I'm not sure that they even talked. So this is why it's very important to be able to, the initiatives that are being launched by SOCA, as well as there are so many other opportunities, you know, the Caucus of Ambassadors, other regional groups that have representation here in the U.S. or within the region to become as engaged in that process, because the existence of the TIFA in and of itself guarantees.
And that's what I was going to ask you. How will you pull in, or who would you pull in here? Because we have to get it through.
Well, that's a third level.
Here.
So I gave you the CBI. Do you need legislation? Government to government, which is currently you have a TIFA. So that, and there's one example of how through that TIFA, Uruguay is now the logistics, services, and ICT hub of South America. Investment, trade flows, and so on. No law, no trade agreement, nothing. The third area is what we call business facilitation measures. Go directly to the industry, go directly to the service sector, whether it be health, medical tourism, entertainment, fashion. We're looking to figure 3 or 4 key sectors, and you work with the businesses themselves in the region, in the US, the Caribbean diaspora, for example, and say, what can we do to help facilitate more trade and investment in this area for you?
So you cut out some of the red tape.
Exactly. And that
And
could
that's-
end up being something, as we've begun to look, which is really maybe the end result of this, because, as we said, you may not need anything at the legal side of things. For example, we all know Caribbean nurses are very competitive in this market. Every year, depending on whose numbers you look at, World Bank or the region, anywhere from 60 to 80% of nurses graduating from UWI in the region get poached up into hospitals, clinics, and everything in the United States. All of a sudden, there's no visa problem, there's no residency problem, there's no
Back
salary.
to the 50s. It's
Right.
something what they did
Now,
in the 50s, yeah.
You talk to the buyer here in the US, who hospitals, medical schools, and the seller in the region. And just like any supply chain problem with a good, well, if you're buying up 60, 80% and you know you could buy more, why don't we reach an agreement where you just do what
Just
people
keep
do with every other good, produce more? Now there's an investment and a supply challenge in the region. There's not enough. Well, maybe you do a joint venture with the Mayo Clinic, with Georgetown Hospital, with somebody who says, well, let's do a joint venture where instead of only training 300 nurses at UWI, we now
You
do
put two
3,000.
together. I see.
And we take our 1,500, which we need every year, and you keep your 1,500 in the region, and the market has equilibrium.
So that's what you're
So-
talking about. There is a business-to-business dialogue,
Yes.
right? Which,
Business
as you-
facilitation.
right, which would, of course, not necessitate action, as you said, either at the congressional level
Right.
or at the level of the
Executive
executive.
order.
I would say that, you know, I was reading something this morning about the marijuana initiative, right? Here in the
Yes.
US and
Yeah.
the lobbying that's being done. I think
Yep.
it was a first front page article. And it made me think about our pending conversation this evening. And I thought, you know, there are 3 things that you really need, right? More, obviously, but 3 key things that are important. Because who would have thought, right, even
That the
2 years
Caribbean would
ago,
be
that
supplying.
you'd have, right, exactly. So you need timing, obviously, is important,
True.
all right? You need the right coalition of people, and you need a strong message, the right message. So even in the context of being able to say, try to get some amendments to legislation and or executive action, I certainly would not rule that out.
So
And
there is still a chance or an opportunity that you would want to lobby, I don't know if lobby is the right word, but go through Congress to alert
approach
Congress.
Well, no,
Yeah.
they've already been alerted. We
Yeah.
actually have had very positive feedback
Approach
from
them.
the key committees and members and staffers who work on trade issues. But the challenge is, well, tell me what
do you
exactly
do?
would we
Maybe
need to do?
Yeah.
But this is what's so interesting here is all the key trade players in the United States have now become very much aware, you know what? We went on our free trade agreement binge with everybody in Latin America. We got everybody who's
Everything we
available, but this is the region of the world that had a preferential trade agreement and did not
Did
get
not get
graduated to a free trade agreement. And that won't happen, and we need to do something. Just let me give you some figures to give you a sense of the magnitude of this importance. We're talking pretty much across the islands, anywhere from 50 to 90% of the economy is now services. But take a look at trade figures from last year. CARICOM exports to the US were $12 billion. In 2005, they were $35 billion.
Wow.
Okay? U.S.
Is
exports.
this goods or services?
Goods.
Goods only.
Goods. U.S. goods exports to the region last year were 19 billion. In 2005, it was 40 billion in goods. What's happened? That whole CBI program we mentioned, a lot of it involved shipment of inputs and raw materials from the U.S. to the region. They get transformed, manufactured, and get exported back
out.
All that, with the exception of a few companies in Jamaica, Trinidad, and St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia, all that is dead.
Well, Haiti.
And Haiti.
Haiti, yeah.
Services has taken up. Unfortunately, we have no data yet on U.S. CARICOM trade and services. But listen to CARICOM's trade and services with the world. With the world.
Okay, we got 3 minutes left.
With the world right now.
I'll give you two.
CARICOM's trade and services with the world. Last year, services export from CARICOM to the world, $9.6 billion. Okay? And imports of services into the region, 6.6 billion. Now, if you do a quickie that maybe the U.S. is anywhere from 30 to 50%, that's still a sizable amount of resources going in and out of the region in that area. So the question is, how do we leverage policy support, business support to make that more?
Before we close, I'd like you to explain to us on the legal side, what do you think the Caribbean structure, because we often hear about the way the Caribbean does things. Are they ready in the Caribbean to jump on this bandwagon? And what, in terms of preparation, trade preparation, do you think they need in order to get to that level too?
Well, I don't think that's a legal issue so much as it is, building the constituency, right? In the way that Manchester Trade and some of the work that David and I did before as well. So it's not so much of a legal issue, but there are capacity issues even with respect to trade in goods. So most companies, Caribbean countries that export goods out of the U.S., out of the Caribbean into the U.S., actually use another preferential program. They tend not to rely on the CBI as much as they could. They may find that they have to do so now because that program has lapsed. Yes. So there's a need for education to inform people about the existence of CBI.
The other question is, how do the people get involved in this in the Caribbean?
Your business support organizations, I think, are key. They play an essential role. And those are just growing now, evolving. I think they're getting stronger. We see that in the case of the TTCSI. Even the coalition service industries, the CSIs, they're stronger in one country than they are in another country. You have things like the manufacturing associations, the chambers of commerce, export associations, and then a lot of attention could and should be paid to small exporters, to your small exporters who sometimes get excluded from some of these other organizations. So I think the key is focusing on strengthening the capacity of these business support organizations to both inform, educate, and engage them so that they can in turn begin to express their own requests and desires for CBI.
I hope you have a better understanding now of what we meant by SOCA and a better understanding also on what has happened with the Caribbean Basin Initiative over the last 30 years. Thank you so much for watching us in Carib Nation, and thanks to my guests, Andrew Ewart, David Lewis. I'm Doris Dean, and remember, our motto here is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation. Thanks for watching us.